And we are live here to chat about the second half of Bridgerton season 3. I'm so excited. I'm beside myself, figuratively, but literally, I am beside Carey and Kate, and they are just as excited as I am to talk about it. They're just like way less cheesy and hand wavy about it. Carey and Kate, how are you guys tonight?
Absolutely fantastic, excited, and anxious.
Kate, what about you?
I am good. I am excited to talk about it, and I'm excited to see where I think our opinions might diverge. I think we might have some different takes, and I'm excited to talk about it.
I'm like so certain that we're gonna have some different, like it's gonna be like a little Venn diagram situation. I'm sure there's gonna be some overlap,
Mm-hmm.
some differences. We are three very different people, and that is not an accident. This will be a fun discussion. But before I dive into that, do we have any news at the top of the hour?
I have some news.
Yeah.
So I've been hyping up, really excited about Legends of Vox Machina. Any news about that coming up? And they finally announced that season 3 will be start airing October 3rd
Yep.
on Prime. Also on Prime, June 27th will be My Lady Jane. I'm very excited about that. I highly doubt it's going to be anything like the books, but it looks fun nonetheless. I'm really excited about that one. And then back into the Critical Role land, they've also announced that they're doing the voiceover recordings for the Mighty Nine, which is their other show that they're going to be doing.
Yeah.
So I'm very much looking forward to that as well.
That is exciting. It's exciting to see the Vox Machina universe continue and expand. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I have no doubt that I will be seated for that come October. Carrie, what about you? Any news?
If I hadn't shared it already, only murders in the building, asterisk outside of the building, perhaps in Hollywood, returns for season 4 on August 27th. So excited to dial that back in.
You know, it's about time we kick off fall TV programming right, and that is what Only Murders in the Building is going to do. I'm really excited about that. The only news I have is a little something called the Olympics that you might have heard of. Very excited. That's coming up. I will become the worst version of myself. There's nothing I like more than like developing a rapid hyperfixation about something that I have no authority to have strong opinions about, but I'll have strong opinions about anyways. Currently, for me, that's WNBA, but come end of July, that will become the Olympics. And I'm just excited to be insufferable in a way that really transcends how I am just on a day to day basis. So that'll be really fun. Summer Olympics are always really. It's a fun one. There's a lot to kind of get into. There's a lot of fun stuff there. When it comes to Winter Olympics, I really kind of like tunnel vision into ice skating, ice dancing specifically. But with Summer Olympics, I can be annoying in a lot of places at a lot of times, and I will be. So I'm very excited about that. Well, speaking of me being annoying, we should talk about Bridgerton. I have presumptuously titled tonight's live the better half of Bridgerton season 3, which is what I'm referring to the back half as. What are your guys' thoughts? And this is fairly fresh. We're a few days after it dropped, but not so fresh to where this is like an immediate live reaction. Where are we at? What do you think of the second half of season 3?
I mean, we're starting off strong with how we disagree. uh, I,
You hate it.
I didn't hate it, but I didn't hate the first part, and I didn't love the first part either. I just think the first part was a little better.
Yeah.
However, I will say it did have more of the storyline I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think we agree on that point that we are far more interested in the Francesca storyline than they were willing to give us.
Yes.
I wanted so much more about her. Quite honestly, I think where my frustration came from, like not liking this half as much, and it wasn't bad. I just think that this season had some storylines that fell short, that felt kind of slow, drawn out, a little boring. And I know at one point there were some rumors that it was going to be a 6-episode season instead of the standard 8.
Yeah.
and I hesitate to say this, but I think it might have actually suited them better to have cut down some of the extra stuff that they tacked around, um, and cut it down to a 6-episode season. I think some of the storylines would have felt a little bit more streamlined,
Yeah.
and it would have felt stronger. I think they also probably would have had more time to focus on the two romances that were kind of going forth. Obviously, the main one, and then any of the B plot that they wanted to do could have been dedicated towards the background romance, which I fully admit and am okay with it, that being the secondary, the B storyline, because of how that her story is going to progress.
Yeah, it is interesting because I don't even know what the B storyline was supposed to be this season. Was it supposed to be Francesca and her, path of, self discovery and being unlike the other Bridgertons, and not just in terms of her sexuality, but in terms of like her social preferences and where she wants to live and all of that? Was it Benedict and him, being a like 2012 bisexual stereotype, and what's his plot line, a threesome, I don't know, whatever? Was it the Penelope and Eloise piece, or do we consider that to be just part of the main Penelope storyline? Was it Violet and Lady James? Was it Cressida being, we're supposed to see her as a villain, and that's a little soapbox I'll get on later? Like, what are we supposed to see as the B plot line? Because I think they were really strong on what their A plot line was with Penelope and with Colin. And when I say strong, I don't mean that I loved it and it was good and perfect and infallible, but it was, it was a clear dedicated. You can't really sit there and gripe and be like, oh, they don't have, enough Penelope and Colin. Not that I think anybody's sitting there griping about that, because who wants more Colin? Nobody. But in terms of the rest, I don't. Okay, we've got a Colin apologist. That's what we needed. That's what we needed. I don't know what we would consider the B plot line to be. Carey, please defend Colin.
Well, first of all, I will say this. I really liked the second half of season three. It had some sort of organic tension to it, that I appreciated, with the whole Lady Whistledown story,
Uh huh.
and obviously the impact that it had on Penelope. I really enjoyed that. And quite honestly, I did not think that I would. And this goes back to something early we could probably get into later. But I really liked the second half of season three, and I really liked the Penelope and Colin story. And as far as the quote unquote B story, you guys probably know more of the inner workings of this than I do. But it sort of felt like, I don't know if, like, when they were doing this, they were sure that they were going to get a season four, right?
Mm.
So it felt like they said, well, let's throw a lot of different things out there as like B plots for the second half or part of the season, see what resonates, and then we'll build on that for like whatever season four is going to be. And I'll be quite honest, as someone who didn't read the books, and we can get into that later also, I did not really care about the Francesca story, and I know that might, I mean, it was sort of a milk toast relationship, which suited them, but to me, I was like, well, that's fine and that's great. It makes for real good life. It doesn't make for real good television, in my opinion, right? So I just felt like they were throwing a bunch of different things out there to see what sort of stuck. And then they said, well, we've got time to build on that. That was my initial thought and feeling about everything else.
Yeah. It seemed like they were kind of threading in Francesca, Benedict, and Eloise all as sort of candidates for lead for the next season if they do get a fourth season. And it's very likely a fourth season would wrap up all of their storylines. And then, maybe at some point we'd have an event season that gets into Gregory and Hyacinth or something. But I don't know that we'll get 8 full seasons where each individual person is going to have their own individual seasons. We may be approaching a point where they're saying, well, we're not going to have Benedict or Francesca carry the season because we can't have gay people carry a season. So they are going to have to be side characters. So we're going to have Eloise, who we've all kind of adopted as gay, but they are absolutely going to put her with a man. Like they're going to do something there where it's like, well, you win some and you lose some, whatever. And they'll do them all at once. And I think the setup for that created like 3 or 4 B plots all at the same time. Here's what I did like about the second half of season 3. And for me, as I've kind of like thought on it, my rankings for the seasons are Queen Charlotte's my favorite. Season 1 of Bridgerton is my favorite of the seasons of Bridgerton. I have season 3 ranked over season 2. None of them are bad. I'd rewatch all of them. Everybody's wonderful, 10 out of 10, blah, blah, blah. But I have season 3 above it. And I'll tell you why. They didn't win me over with Colin and Penelope. They certainly were never going to win me over with Colin. We know that. But they didn't necessarily win me over with Colin and Penelope. But what they did was they acknowledged a flaw before I got a chance to hate on it. They acknowledged that he's not necessarily bringing anything to the equation for her. So he's not able to fight her battles for her in any sort of old school patriarchal way or new school patriarchal way. It's neither that he has more emotional intelligence than her or he's got, brawn and money and whatever. He's not necessarily bringing anything, but what he says is if his only purpose is to love her, then he's honored to have that purpose. And they present that in a romantic way before somebody like me comes in and is like, well, he brings nothing to the table other than just like being there. Like they acknowledge that and present it in a romantic way. So I have to kind of like give them that. And the fact that Colin was able to like, to an extent, make his peace with that he's like jealous of Penelope because she's a writer or he's jealous of, whatever it is. And then he's able to still love her, protect her, and like be secure enough to be around her as her person, I think is a credit to the second half of season 2 and allows those B plot lines to kind of falter and kind of go different directions in what their message is on love while still having here's what the Colin and Penelope season brings to the table in terms of what the definition of love is that they bring to the Bridgerton universe. That's my minor defense, but I've still got a lot of gripes. We'll get to them.
Well, I think what you both have said is really interesting, and I kind of agree on a lot of ways. So I will say on the second half of season 3, I do start to like grow to at least respect Colin a bit more. Not love him. He's still kind of not my favorite, but I do appreciate the exact same journey that you were talking about. I will say part of what I don't love about the second half is actually the surrounding A plot line that makes him better. It's actually the stuff that's happening to him makes you feel more sympathetic for him.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily that most of what makes him feel better is him changing. And it's more of the situation he finds himself in. For as much as he is angry and he's storming around for a little bit, you can't blame him. Like his anger is very valid and you understand why he's hurt. And a lot of the other characters around him make him seem better by comparison because they are scrambling. They're not necessarily making terrible mistakes, new mistakes. They are recovering from previous mistakes and scrambling to try to catch up. I think where my frustration lies on the A plot of season 3 in the second half is it went 8 different directions with, she was trying to recover her relationship with Colin and her and Eloise were back and forth. And Eloise, I love Eloise, but Eloise is never a consistent character. She will push and pull and push and pull. And the only thing consistent about that is it's like, as lovingly as I can say, it's very selfishly led. The Cressida storyline is actually part of the more interesting aspect of it, but there's parts of it that felt underdeveloped. Like, she was vilified, but everybody also clearly felt sympathetic towards her, but then angry towards her, and it felt a little disjointed to me about who felt what and why. And then there were like 8 different B plot lines that we were all supposed to care about, and I wish I could care about them more. Other than the Francesca one, I couldn't care. I thought the cutting away to Benedict, I love Benedict as a character. I don't know why they kept on doing that during episode 8. It was really weird. Just like a dramatic scene, cutaway. Dramatic scene, cutaway.
Is that what they think we want? Like, is that what they're like, okay, you know what, like, romance, paper book, steamy
Mass
readers
market.
want. They want like bisexual stereotypes from the early 2000s. He's bisexual, threesome, obviously. Like, oh my God, we're so tired. Can you come up with something else? Like,
Yeah.
please. That's so outdated. There's just
Yeah.
like
Fun to
little
watch.
moments in there
No,
where like you know they didn't
it's
have
fun
like a
to
young,
watch.
fresh take.
Yeah.
Sorry, Carrie, I
So
talked over you.
no, it was fun to watch. But here's my thing about season three, right? For me, I mean, all of these stories are quote unquote always about like the relationship, the connection being sort of the end game. But for me, season three wasn't necessarily about that because the wedding came early. Well, not incredibly early, but the marriage came and they got married and the wedding and all that stuff. But that certainly was not like the most significant part of the show for me. The most significant part of the show for me, being a reporter, has always been this sort of Lady Whistledown sort
Yeah.
of back and forth and what that means and what it exposes and why she does it and what it means to her. And for that time when she was in the circle having to explain why she did it and what it meant, that to me was the biggest moment of the entire season. And so everything else, I don't want to say it didn't matter, but she could have been married to like Bigfoot or whoever, Colin, whatever. That didn't matter.
Yeah.
That moment for me mattered the most, and so that's what sort of made it for me. Um, it'll, so the thing about that is though, what made it's going to be interesting if they move forward with Lady Whistledown, what it turns into, what it becomes,
Mhm.
considering that the sort of best resource she had to do that was anonymity and the shadows. And so not having that anymore changes what Lady Whistledown should be. And so I'm interested to see where that goes. And that's why this season, I know you didn't ask me to rank them. I still haven't seen Queen Charlotte yet. But
You'll love it.
so season one is still for me the I don't I really really like season three. If season three was the first season, I don't know that I would have been as invested in the show overall if it came out first. So that's why season one will always hold like a special place.
Hmm.
Um, but I certainly like season three over season two. And I'm not gonna lie, season three to me personally is not very far below season one. I know
Agreed.
blasphemy, right? But for the Lady Whistledown of it all,
Yep.
that's just me.
I really I really appreciated them giving voice to her grappling with what to do about Lady Whistledown. What is Lady Whistledown to her and what is it to everyone else? And I thought that they handled that plot line of the queen being after her, but then still, giving her the chance to speak for herself to the ton. It will be very interesting to see where it goes from here. I suspect it won't be like it's handled in the books after Penelope's story in the books. I believe, and Kate can probably speak to this better than I haven't read the books after that, but I believe as it ends at the end of her book, she quits, right?
I don't remember. So I only read the first four. So I haven't read Francesca's or Eloise or Greg and
I only
Hyde's.
read the
And
first four as well. Okay. Huh.
yeah,
Well, I'll have to see. I'm now curious to read Francesca's book. I was not previously. I I'm curious what they do with that. I suspect it'll be something along the lines of a Lady Whistledown gossip network where Penelope has folks who feed, like gossip and intrigue and whatever, and she still puts out a paper, but she's kind of essentially like the editor of a network. Um, kind of similar to how Iris inexplicably became the head of a notable news blog. Wah, wah, wah. Okay, I'll let that go. Let's talk about Francesca. So there's sort of two things we can draw from Francesca's storyline. One is, and what I got from the first half, not knowing the direction they were going with, is love doesn't always have to look like this big, over the top fairy tale where, you completely lose your head around this person and you've got the butterflies and your heart beats fast and it's just this tumultuous end of the world thing until you're together. Like it can just be this calm thing where like somebody understands you and you understand them and you like being around them and you want to be away from the chaos together. And I was like, you know what? I love that. Like, that's so sweet. Boring, sure, but that's so sweet. And I thought that was a message they were going to stand behind. But the second thing that we get out of Francesca's storyline, and this may or may not be a spoiler, again, I haven't read her book, so take it with a grain of salt, but I think we all kind of inferred it from the end, is is Michaela his cousin? It was his cousin. And I think in the book, Michael is his brother? No? Okay. So basically, I guess what happens, spoilers, in Francesca's book, as far as I understand it, is her first husband passes and she ends up with his brother, Michael. We can infer from what happened at the end of the wedding that they may be setting us up for her first husband passing and her ending up with his cousin, Michaela. And with that, the way they set it up was not her having a similar calm, peaceful reaction with Michaela, but instead it was, kind of based on the foreshadowing of what her mom said of like, when I first met your father, I forgot my name, whatever. She had that reaction on Michaela. She was stomach in her throat and she forgot her name and, pulse racing and all that kind of stuff. So is the message we're supposed to take from this, like, is Bridgerton's sort of like claim thesis here that no, love is always chaotic and what you think is love and this peaceful whatever, and you're going to run off to Scotland or whatever, it's actually like not real. And it does have to be, the girl who makes you forget your name. Thoughts?
I have a couple. To kind of like take a step back to then kind of readjust where I'm going, I think what it made me realize is I don't read or watch a ton of primarily romance. Like most of what I read it's a fantasy and then there's a B, C storyline with a bit of romance. And not all the time, but I think what ends up being some of my favorites are the ones where they're in a chaotic mess and their love ends up being more of the understated thing with it. And I think that that's maybe why I gravitated towards Francesca's, is because so much of her story actually has more to do with her standing up for herself. Even though it's not like forcefully antagonistic, her mom is coming from a place of genuine love and just concern and care. But there is something to be said about her kind of having to put her foot down and be like, no, I want to do this because this is my way of, I still am trying to figure out who I am, and being in this city, in this place, I can't figure that out. So I need time away. And I think quite honestly, that's her journey in this story. Whether she fell in love or not, that was her journey. And I think that's what was so interesting to me she's the one person who's kind of before the romance really put her foot down and been like, I need to figure me out, and has become more bold in her own protectiveness of herself. Going forward, I could very much see them saying stuff like, there's a whole metaphor that they were kind of pushing forward about her wanting to go to Scotland to find herself. And it will only be when she's in Scotland around Michaela that she will come to realize what's going on, how she's feeling about Michaela, X, Y, and Z, whatever. I don't know how the books go for her. Yeah. Other than that basic premise that you laid out. I think what's so interesting about her is because she's so dynamically opposed to all the other Bridgertons with how quiet she is. A lot of times they all seem like they very confidently know it themselves and don't really figure out what's going on until they're in a relationship, married, whatever. And that's when the dissection comes for them. I think it'd be really interesting for them to flip it on its head with Francesca and have to do a lot of self-discovery for her to even open herself up to a more intense love or whatever it is. Well, I still don't think that they're trying to invalidate the love that she has right now with John.
It seems like both could be true at once, but in a very black and white sense, it seems like both cannot be true at once. It seems by her claims, which I was buying into, of like, no, it can be this, and it can be, we're going to find ourselves together, and it's going to be very peaceful, and it's, whatever. It seems like by bringing in something else, it's like, well, no, wait, I'm rooting for that. I'm obviously rooting for her and Michaela. Like, I want that. How do you juggle both
I don't know.
without
And
having
this also comes from
Benedict?
this also probably comes from like a protect your peace kind of person from my perspective. I actually really liked John. I liked a lot of what he
Same.
was about.
Mm-hmm.
And I am fully interested in seeing where Francesca's story goes, even though I know he's not going to stick around much longer, as sad as that is. So I think, like, kind of like what you said, right now the setup feels very much like it's black and white. Only like one of these things can be true. But maybe with them getting, if they get a fourth season and they have to tackle all four of them or all three of the remaining older siblings,
Mm-hmm.
it will kind of be the theme of multiple things can be true, because they're all very bi-coded. They're all very characters that lead with this kind of characteristic of existing things that shouldn't go together but do just within their character. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe that'll be this underlying theme of the season of like, you can have both. You can be both things. They don't cancel each other out just because you have one part of yourself and the other part of yourself.
That makes sense. I can see that storyline working in the hands of like Shonda. Like, I feel like she handles complex storylines in a way that like nobody else does, whether I like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Carey, did any of the B plot lines like stand out to you, whether it was in the second half of season 3 or season 3 overall? Were there any B plots where you're like, that's the one I'm interested in, that's the one I need to see in season 4?
Well, I'll answer that question second. The first thing I wanted to say is going back to Francesca and was it John Kilmartin? Is that his name?
Yep.
So, as someone who has not read the books and sort of didn't have the expectation or the sort of knowledge of what this Michaela brings, the potential that Michaela brings, I sort of read the situation between Francesca and Michaela. I mean, not Michaela, but Francesca and John differently, right? So when they were married and there was the kiss, and there was that moment when after they kiss where there's like most people would expect there to be like some sort of spark or something, right? But I'm like, based on the relationship that we've seen those two have, and the fact that there wasn't quote unquote a spark, or at least not a spark that you could see as an audience, to me, I was like, well, of course there really isn't a spark. Their relationship has always felt like a comfortable, like pair of slippers, right? There shouldn't be
Right.
sparks. But when there weren't any, she had that look on her face like, well, dang it, I kind of sort of expected that there would be,
Right.
even though nothing about their relationship up to that point told me that there should be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then fast forward to the moment when she met Michaela, when she stumbled over herself with her name, and of course there was that callback to the conversation that she had with Violet. But in the moment, I wasn't thinking that. In the moment, I was thinking, this is John's cousin, and she doesn't know the name of the woman that he just married. And I know that he and his family are sort of like, I don't want to say distant, but they're sort of like reserved, I would suspect. But I'm thinking he would have wrote his cousin a letter that says, I'm marrying this woman and this is who it is and this is why you're here. And
Mm-hmm.
so when that introduction happened, when she stumbled over her name, to me it wasn't because, oh, I see this spark with Michaela. It's like, well, dang it, John, you didn't even tell this woman who I am. That was sort of in my head at the exact
Mm-hmm.
moment. Now, obviously, afterwards, and sort of doing a little bit of research as one is wont to do, it started to fall into place. But at the moment, I'm like, she probably just
Flustered.
feels like, yeah. And I'm like, so that was my initial thought. So after that, doing some research and listening to you, it sort of falls into place and makes sense. But that was my initial thought. It was like, well, of course, there's no spark. There shouldn't have been one. And she's flustered because this dude didn't even introduce his cousin or tell his cousin who she is. So that's that.
I think your
As far as
take is what they wanted audiences who had not read the books to think of, sort of like, she was flustered or she was caught off guard, but not necessarily, are we, sort of like, wait, are we reading into it? Is there chemistry there? But like, oh, probably not, whatever. And then once they, get online and get on Twitter, whatever, then see people talking about it. Stormy in the chat shed some light. It sounds like she has read Francesca's book. Slight spoilers, but she says in the books, Michael is a cousin and falls for Fran while John is still alive. And it's years after John's death that Fran gets with Michael. So I'm wondering how they handle that. Is this something we'll see stretched out across multiple seasons even?
Well, we know 9 months has already gone by.
Yeah.
And so, but to answer your question about what you know the answer to this. I gotta say
Violet
Violet
storyline and
Give me
Lady
that.
Danbury's
Yeah.
brother. Yes.
Give me that. I'm a man of a certain age, so give me that. That's what I want to see.
Yes. I'm so excited to see theirs move forward. And I think it will give some really interesting, like, meaty story for Violet, for Lady Danbury, for Lady Danbury's brother to play with. And while I love all the Bridgerton kids, except for probably Anthony, but, to some extent, I love all the Bridgerton kids, and I like to see them, find their little happily ever after and do this, that, or the other. They are, and I don't think this is a controversial statement, they are not as good of actors as whoever it is that's playing Violet, whoever it is that's playing Lady Danbury, whoever it is that's playing the Queen, whoever it is that's playing Lady Danbury's brother. The older actors in this are just a little better, but they're still really, really hot. So it makes sense to put at least one romance in that age range. Let me just go on a little, let me answer my own question because it was a leading question. The Cressida storyline. Now, once upon a time, after the first half of the season, or maybe after just an episode or two, I tweeted something silly like, oh, Eloise did like the classic gay thing and like fell in love with a straight girl who's really bitchy, Cressida, And now I got to reel that back because Cressida's not straight. And that kind of gives me a soft spot for her. But there's more to it than that. Let's set aside the speculation about Cressida's sexuality. Slight spoilers for the Queen Charlotte season. But in the Queen Charlotte season, there is a character who we're all familiar with, but I'm not going to give away that spoiler. There's a character we're all familiar with who has a difficult storyline wherein she is forced to marry a man that she does not want to marry, an older man at that, who she doesn't want to marry and still has to go through with it and still has to, sleep with him and be available to him and all that kind of stuff. And it's like some man who's like on death's doorstep. And we as the audience are naturally allowed to be extremely sympathetic to her. And when she then later in the season does some things that are ethically, I don't want to say questionable, they're just wrong. Like, she does some ethically wrong things. We as the audience are like, well, like, what does she owe to her husband anyways? Like, it's fine because he kind of sucks. And she didn't want to marry him anyways, and he knew that, whatever. Okay. That context. And I am on the front line of defense for said woman. I'm only keeping her anonymous so as not to ruin the season for Carey. Cressida's in literally the exact same situation. Literally the exact same situation. And I'm like, why? Like, even setting aside my little soapbox on, like, it seems like they're heavily insinuating that some of all of this has to do with the fact that, like, she doesn't like men or has had some sort of scandals with girls before or whatever, and that's kind of tainting all this. Setting all that aside, she is still being forced by her parents to, be ostracized in an unknown location, be forced to marry some man that she doesn't want to marry. Even set aside the fact that it's like some man who's like 40 years her senior or whatever. Like, it is a man she does not want to marry, and she's being forced to. And in that sort of coercive situation, should we not be on her side if she's like, I need $5,000 to start a new life? Like, I don't care that she's bribing Penelope. Like, if she needs $5,000 or whatever it is to go, like, start a new life and not have to be coerced into relations with a man that she doesn't want, why are we not on her side? Is it just because they try to, like, do her hair weird? Like, is that why we're supposed to be like, well, she seems villainy? Like, be so for real. Anyways, what are y'all's thoughts?
Because I know exactly what you're talking about. I'll throw a couple little things out there without getting too spoilery. Couple things. First of all, the hair's awful because the actress is beautiful and they can't let her be the prettiest person on screen ever. So they have to make her look outlandish so that way she can't stand out too much.
Jokes on them.
This to a couple people.
Still looks camp and hot.
Yeah. The other thing, and I'm half joking, half kind of serious, the main difference between what Cressa's doing and the mystery character you're talking about, the mystery character you're talking about is good at what she's doing, is able to put like effort, thought, and follow through. Mm-hmm. As much as like Cressa is messing up, is doing something morally bad, you're also extremely sympathetic because you do understand, like, that's part of the power of like this kind of story and this setup is you understand she's put in a hard position and she's maybe not going about it in the wisest of ways, but you understand why she's doing what she's doing and you can be sympathetic without agreeing that she is doing the correct thing.
Right.
But yeah, genuinely, a lot of what separates these two characters is one is successful, one is a lot more cunning, and one is a lot just more precise with their choices and their actions. And Cressida is not. Cressida leaps from plan to plan quite frequently. I mean, she comes up with this idea that she's going to impersonate Whistledown within a party and doesn't really think about the consequences. As much as we might disagree with the choices this other character makes in her season, she definitely puts a lot of thought and follow through and consideration in all of her actions. And I think that's really what separates the two characters. Ironically, it's actually
the lack of social awareness. She's the lack of social awareness and the lack of like empathy and understanding of an only child.
Yeah. I will also say though, to me personally, it's also what makes Cressida's actions more forgivable.
Yeah.
While still making her less like, she feels more camp, she feels more silly, she's easier to vilify, but I also am more sympathetic to her actions.
Yeah.
The other character we're talking about, I'm like, you're so smart, you could have found another way.
Yeah.
Still love this character. I'm just saying, like, that's the difference of how I feel about the two you're comparing. And I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
all I can say is agree. Because I remember right after the season was over, I had an argument with a very good friend of mine who was basically saying I want to throw Cressida Cowper off like the nearest cliff, and I'm like, how could you? What are we talking about here? It made absolutely no sense.
Mm-hmm.
The question for me has to be why they portrayed Cressida the way that she did, but sort of like why. Well, maybe that is the question, because it's like when your characters in a show serve a purpose, and the question you have to ask yourself is, why did this character have to meet this fate when she was probably the most vulnerable character of the entire season, and basically we've just thrown her away, and it's like, what was the point?
I'm hopeful that, again, in the hands of Shonda, this will be used to have us as an audience confront our willingness to turn on desperate women. Because Cressida is this season a desperate woman. In season 1, she was not desperate. She was still a new debutante, and she was, the tall, blonde, whatever type of thing, and we're led to believe that's like the desirable beauty standard or whatever at this time, which, like, side note, jokes on them, at that time, at the time they're referencing, Penelope was literally the beauty standard. So jot that down. But in this make-believe world, theoretically, tall, blonde, and statuesque and whatever, and skinny and whatever is the beauty standard. Okay, we'll accept that. This is a modern thing. So she was not desperate. Season 2, she was starting to get bitter. She was starting to get jealous. But she wasn't per se desperate. In this season, we finally see Cressida as desperate. And we as an audience are very willing to turn on desperate women. We're very willing to turn on women that are using their last lashes of power, their last bit of whatever they have in their toolkit to try to save themselves after, being placed on the edge of the cliff, and she's on the edge of the cliff here. And I'm hopeful that at some point in future seasons, probably next season, she'll come back and we'll be forced to confront how easily we villainized her. I do think it's smart to pair her specifically as Penelope's villain, because she was not Daphne's villain. She was not Kate's villain. So Daphne's villain was basically, her own naivety. Kate's villain was, to an extent, Edwina, to be honest with you. That's how it's paired off. That's why I don't like season 2. And you can argue that Kate's villain was society and the pressure on oldest daughters and blah, blah, blah. But unfortunately, it was also her younger sister, and it didn't have to be. They had an actual good book to follow and chose not to, but I already went into that. With Penelope, having Cressida be her villain, per se, blackmailing her, ripping her dress, targeting her, makes sense because Cressida is the anti-Penelope. She is not very smart. To Kate's point earlier, she doesn't have the cunning, the quick-witted, she was not able to write a believable Lady Whistledown. She could barely write a few sentences. She is not very observant. She is not consistent. She can't keep a secret. She kept a secret once earlier this season, but that's about it. She is not, soft and approachable the way Penelope is, which is how Penelope got all of her information. She's just in every possible way the opposite of Penelope. So in that sense, having her be Penelope's villain or foil makes sense. Foil is probably a better word than villain. However, not then at the end of this season confronting the fact that why are we feeling this way about a woman who's about to be forced into marriage, sex, and life with somebody she, to literally forced to, not just societal pressures. She would literally have to get up and run away from home in order to avoid it, type of thing. I think is something I would have liked to see confronted at the end of the season. I'm very hopeful that they can confront it early on in upcoming seasons. Otherwise, you've just sort of activated an innate pettiness in people where we're willing to turn on desperate women and then not forced us to look into a mirror and see it.
Yeah. I think they have a lot more potential with her character, especially since how little she was in the books, how much they've put effort into her, and I really hope they continue to use her character and not just let her be shipped off of the show, as it were. I do think it's interesting how you're kind of talking about that. So as much as the Cressida storyline is kind of this weird double-edged sword for me. It was part of my favorite part of this half of the season. It also had a lot of details that made me really frustrated. Mm-hmm. And it felt rushed and clunky, and I think that's probably why I don't like this part of the season as much. There are a ton of details that are small, and you can ignore them, but when you think about them, make no sense. Mm-hmm. So for the fact that she was able to figure out that it was Penelope after 5 minutes of asking questions at a print shop, I cannot for the life of me believe that the Queen's Bow Street runners couldn't figure that one out. I can't let it go. I can't figure it out. I don't understand.
My argument to that would be only that once the Queen got into trying to figure out who it was, and once everyone else did, people's lips started to loosen.
Yeah.
I don't think Cressida would have gotten that until those things happened. So that's my only defense.
That's fair, but it's still funny that she was so easily able to. I mean, not even 5 minutes worth of work on the show's work time for us to get that answer. I just felt really, it felt forced that she was able to find it that fast. The other part of it was kind of something you mentioned earlier. We were talking about when she kissed John, Francesca and John's first kiss. It's not the first kiss, I'm sorry, when they introduced Michaela. So as writers, they know where the story's going, and they're very much trying to pitch both to a new audience and the audience of people that have read the books. And I think in towing that line, they missed a critical part of that detail, which is exactly what you said. Why wouldn't his family know the name of the woman that he's married? Mm-hmm. And in trying to kind of accommodate both audiences, they had a slip up that makes a lack of sense, because then it comes off as either John is so cold-hearted that he wouldn't tell his family at all, that either Michaela is so over everybody else that she wouldn't even care to remember the wife's name, that there's so many other social norms that even as a person that you don't know all of the typical things, it reads as weird. And there were a handful of other examples throughout the second half of the season that were just small details that added a lot of clunkiness to each story that it was a part of, that really kind of slowed things down for me. And that's why I think, to be honest, that's why I didn't like the second half as much.
I think sometimes there's just plot lines that, for some audience members, it'll go in one ear and out the other, or will just be willing to suspend disbelief and accept it. And then for others, there'll be a hang up. I know, like, for some, the music or the costumes or, whatever it is can be that hang up there. I think we're leaving this season way more invested in Francesca's storyline, or at least I am leaving the season way more invested in Francesca's storyline than I would have been otherwise. I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm like, I'm gonna actually read her book, whereas I've already read Benedict's book, but I would not leave this season being like, I want to read Benedict's book, which, by the way, it's nothing like this. They did give a little nod to Benedict's storyline likely coming up with Violet's masquerade. Benedict's storyline kicks off with the masquerade. That would be really interesting to see. I just don't think he can carry a season himself. I mean, they can certainly try, but I don't think he can carry a season himself. So I think his will either be paired with Eloise or paired with Fran, or possibly all three. And that will be interesting to see. I want to give a shout out again to Stormy in the chat. She's shared some of her thoughts, as we've discussed as well, that she wanted more Paulin, Penelope and Colin ship name. She also did not necessarily care for Benedict's storyline. She didn't care about, seeing some of the Eloise. She's still anti-Eloise. It is what it is. I'm pro-Eloise, but Stormy, I see your side. And she illuminates that basically Cressida brought this on herself by being mean to Penelope. And to that, I will say that Cressida is gay and bitter, so let her live. Yes, Carey, go ahead.
I don't know if you were going to ask this question or if it sort of landed with you guys like it did with me, but did this feel like a series finale to any degree? Because it did to me. And I don't know how to quantify it or define it, but it felt almost like a series finale in terms of what they tied up.
It kind of did to me, but also every book in this series and kind of in this genre feels like the end of a story. We don't really see those characters ever again. It is unusual, for example, that we're seeing Anthony and Kate, and that, in my opinion, they took up too much screen time, but like XOXO, love them, whatever. Most of the time in this genre, once a couple gets together, they disappear off the face of the earth. And with Penelope being Lady Whistledown, that's a, pretty critical part of the story. So wrapping that storyline and then wrapping Colin and Penelope feels almost like wrapping storylines that have existed throughout all first 3 seasons. So yes, but the books are kind of like that too.
Yeah. I mean, because even if they have Penelope kind of continue to exist and maybe adapt however she's going to be doing her writing, I mean, you won't hear Julie Andrews anymore. And that it does kind of take this very specific thing of how, like, the very specific flavor of the show.
Mhm.
I mean, to kind of talk about something else, other show we've watched, we're all kind of concerned about Only Murders in the Building
Yeah.
leaving the building,
Yeah.
and so it could go great, it could go poorly, and it's because this like staple part of the show is being removed, and we're going to see if it falls like a Jenga tower or if it's going to work fine, and we really won't know. But it does kind of have that tone of this voice that we've been hearing for 3 seasons. Like the one of the most consistent characters is Julie Andrews' voice. Um, is going to be gone. And even if Penelope's around, Julie Andrews isn't. Lady Whistledown might not be. So that's going to be what I think why it felt like a finale, even if they continue on.
If they go with my theory, which they may not, of having it be kind of like Lady Whistledown becomes a network, like a gossip network, a women's gossip network at that, that could be justification for continuing to use Julie Andrews' voice instead of Penelope's voice. But you kind of go either way on that. And at some point, with a series like this, you don't necessarily want to have it too tied to too big name of an actor, wherein you could lose that unexpectedly, at some point. I think with Penelope, I heard, rumors that basically like Penelope's under like a super lockdown contract. Like she is with this show regardless. Like they've got her as much as they want her, as opposed to, like Daphne, I think like she's kind of come and go. Simon was like one season and I'm out. Kate and Anthony are like the people who play them, Jonathan and Simone, are like actively trying to like come back every season as much as they want. Like they really want to be in this universe, so they're there. But like, some of these folks can kind of come and go or be written in and out. But my understanding is Penelope is like locked down. They'll have her when they want her. Could be wrong about that. Who knows? We are almost out of time. So, what else we watched this week will remain a mystery. However, Women of the Week will not remain a mystery. I want to hear from you two about what women made TV great for you these past couple weeks. Who should I pick on first? Carey, do you want to go first?
I'll go first. It'll be short and sweet. As to not give away spoilers, but I have been watching The Acolyte, which is a new Star Wars live action show set about 100 years before, I think it's 100 years before the fall of the Empire or the rise of the Empire, whatever the case may be. My point is, if you are a fan of Star Wars for a good long time, it felt like Princess Leia was the only woman in the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have a show that is fronted, I mean, sort of like Ahsoka, but this show is fronted by a great deal of fantastic women. And I could tell you all of their names, but I only know like the lead is Amanda Steinberg, who was in the Hunger Games, if
Yep.
I'm not
She was
mistaken.
rude. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Carrie Ann Moss from Matrix fame. And so you just have this universe that is getting increasingly and incredibly populated by fantastic women. And I just wanted to give a shout out to all of them, even though I'm not doing them any justice by not being able to rattle off all their names. But you should watch the show, then you can know their names too. Acolyte on Disney Plus.
I've been wondering if I should watch Acolyte. I was just about to reinstate Disney Plus because I still got some things piling up there to watch. Kate, what about you? Who's Woman of the Week for you?
I have read the most recent installment of Emily Henry's contemporary romance novels.
Mm-hmm.
And I've previously talked about all of them before. They're all getting like movie deals, it seems like, and we'll probably continue to talk about them when there's more news. But in reading Funny Story, which is the newest one, the main romance was fine, but she does have a friendship that she develops as a workplace friendship with this girl named Ashley. She is a single mom after a divorce, and I think honestly is probably the stronger storyline. Getting to see women in their 30s becoming friends, and how friendship as an adult actually more oftentimes looks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a really strong portrayal of how that relationship would happen, but also this character who is unabashedly herself. She's very brash. She's very quote unquote unlikable, and I loved her. She was amazing, and I think it's also such a great representation of somebody who can kind of seem like a bulldozer, can kind of seem hard and like sharp edged, but then in her own home life, her personal life, she's very soft. She has a lot of kind of quirky, cozy edges that it gets to be explored. And I think it's a fantastic representation, even though she was a side character and was not a main storyline by any means.
I love that. I've got those books on my list. It has been a crazy summer, so I've been quite behind on reading, but they are still on my list, and I'm excited to get into them. Everything you describe about them reassures me that when summer calms down, and we're in, late summer, early fall season, they'll be seasonally appropriate for a good leaves changing read. My one of the week is from a reality show, kind of. It's Jeopardy again. It was Jeopardy last time. It was Victoria who won Jeopardy Masters, and this time it is yet another Jeopardy woman. I hate to be a broken record, but the more I thought about it, the more I just knew Adriana deserved Woman of the Week. She is currently on a Jeopardy winning streak. And she is, if she wins tonight, which I think it's airing right now, she will break into the top 10 of all time of winning streaks for Jeopardy, which is kind of a big deal. But she has just been so incredibly charming to watch. I just cannot explain just like how just delightful. She is an archivist. She translates like old historical documents and talks about how she can like read old handwriting from like way back when and all this kind of stuff. And she's so like composed and funny at the same time. And I just like sit there and bask in her knowledge as she answers questions that I've never heard of in my entire life. And it has just been such a joy. And I hope I'm not jinxing her by doing this. I hope she wins tonight and breaks into the top 10. But given that it is tonight and it is during our discussion, I thought Miss Adriana deserves Woman of the Week. That takes us over to 8:01. Thank you for the 1 extra minutes. And thank you for chatting about Bridgerton with me, even though we all had different opinions, or rather because we all had different opinions, because that's kind of what made it fun. I'm looking forward to chatting soon about whatever else we're watching this summer. And certainly once we get into Only Murders in the Building season, you won't be able to escape me. I will talk to you then. Bye.
Bye.
Jesus.
Watch as Cammie tries to figure out technology.